Welcome to First Tuesdays. Thanks to all of you for coming. It's a beautiful day. We have a little smaller crew than usual, but that's just fine because got a great guest. I should reintroduce myself. I'm Mick Dumke from ProPublica.
And I'm Ben Joravsky from The Reader and WCPT.
All right. And joining us tonight is State Representative Lou Lang. Your home base is Skokie, correct?
Right.
And Representative Lang has been in the General Assembly now for 31 years, if I did my math right. Is that correct?
You got it.
All right. Well, tell us, what would possess a person to want to go back to Springfield over and over again for 31 years?
Well, first, I apologize to Tim. Apparently, I've held down the crowd. And so I'm really sorry about that. And you should never invite a politician to a place called the Hideout. At any rate, I was always interested in government and politics. Strangely enough, because I had an uncle who didn't get married until he was in his 50s. And it goes like this: he would come to our house to mooch food every day, particularly on Sundays, and my father and my uncle, who were completely on different sides of the political spectrum, would argue all day long about Meet the Press and Face the Nation and all those shows. And I then became interested in government and politics. Graduated law school, and throughout law school and even high school I was involved in the Democratic Party. In fact, I became one of the youngest precinct captains ever at the age of 12. Nobody really gave a damn what I had to say when I was at their door, but I knocked.
All right, well, let's pause here for a second. Let's set the scene here a little bit. Where was this, and how did this happen at the age of 12? You became a precinct captain.
Well, so political organizations will take anybody, including a 12-year-old who's tall enough to see through the window. And I was dispatched to walk this precinct. And I remember the first building I went into was not a home, it was an apartment building. It was only 2 stories high, but it was a whole block long. So it looked like a barracks. And I don't know how I got past the buzzer system, but I did. And I go up, decide I'm going to start on the 2nd floor, so I knock on the first door. And from way deep inside the apartment, I can hear a television, and I hear a little lady, "Who is it?" And I say, because I don't want to be too loud about it, "It's your precinct captain." "Who?" "Your precinct captain." "Who?" And this went on about 4 times, and finally I yelled, "It's your precinct captain!" And I heard every door down the hall double lock while I was standing there. And that was my indoctrination into being a precinct captain. Didn't go so well. Dogs chased me. I've since learned from my friend Marty Moylan, a state representative, that when you're walking precincts, you should have dog biscuits in your pocket. Who knew? Yeah. I was 12 years old. I didn't know that. So fast forward, I became the attorney for the Niles Township Democratic Organization. Then I became the attorney for Niles Township government. And during that period of time, my state representative became a judge, and I was appointed to replace him. So I became a state representative the easy way, by appointment. And now they can't get rid of me. They tried, but they haven't been successful doing that.
Okay, so who was the ward committeeman, or was it township committeeman?
Township, yeah, it was Niles Township. His name was Cal Sucker. Many people know him. He was around a long time, and now, along with my other duties, I'm the Niles Township Democratic Committeeman, along with being the executive vice chairman of the Cook County Democratic Party. I'm very busy. I have a lot of hats.
And so you, when you were doing this precinct work, you were going, this was in Skokie, I presume?
Sure.
So you were started off at the age of 12 working the precincts of Skokie, and here you are all these years later, and you're still working the precincts of Skokie.
I'm still working the precincts, and I'm getting a little tired. Some say that the index finger in my right hand is about half of the length it should be because of all the doorbell ringing I've done over the years. It's a long time.
Yeah. And now Lou's regular on my show on the radio, and I always bring him up, call him the professor, and make him go through what's on the agenda in Springfield. So I kind of had the idea that we would do the same thing here. It's a very eventful time in the state politics. But before we do that, just explain to the folks here the position that you have and the role that you play in the Democratic Party in Springfield, with Mike Madigan as the speaker. What's your role in relation to Madigan and the rest of the Democrats?
So I'm on the leadership team. I have been for some years, but not too long ago I was appointed deputy majority leader. So we have a speaker, we have a majority leader who is Barbara Curry. We have two deputy majority leaders, Art Turner from Chicago and myself, and then a series of other leaders. Generally speaking, when we're in session, I'm in the chair. I'm running the General Assembly. Speaker's very rarely on the floor. Just as if you've watched C-SPAN, you rarely see the Speaker of the House on the floor of the Congress. My job is to keep order and keep the thing moving and to try to pass as many bills as we can pass during the period of time we have in a given day on the floor.
Do you, so you're well aware of what votes you have on a given issue. I mean, can you describe that process? Are you going around, you're not slapping people upside the head these days, but what do you do to make sure you have the votes and to keep count? How exactly does that happen?
So we don't slap people upside the head on camera, not where you can see it. It's pretty similar to what you've seen and heard, but most people in the General Assembly lobby their own bills. There aren't that many bills that are what you call party bills, where the Speaker dispatches leaders to make sure that different members are voting for this bill or against that bill. It doesn't happen all that often. Almost every bill on the floor that is sponsored by a particular member is lobbied by that member. Maybe there's some paid lobbyists involved too from time to time. But for instance, any bill I have, for instance, right now I'm working on the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment after what seems to be 100 years. And I am talking to member after member, person by person, eyeball to eyeball, to try to convince them to vote for it. And by the way, you would think that in the year 2018 that would be a no-brainer, but not yet. We're close, but not there yet. Maybe soon.
Now, in terms of that one, I would presume, correct me if I'm wrong, that the 67 Democrats are all aboard on that one, right?
Actually, that's not true. I have 62 of the 67 Democrats.
5 holdouts.
5 that will be no, not holdouts, they're just no. And we need 71 votes to pass that. If we do, Illinois will be the 37th state to pass the Equal Rights Amendment for the federal Constitution, leaving one more state necessary to make the Equal Rights Amendment, equal rights for women, part of the United States Constitution. And I think that's something worth doing. So I've been spending a lot of time in the deep, dark recesses of that dark hole called the Republican side of the aisle. And I have some success over there, but you know, the far right has gotten a hold of some of those people, and they've convinced some of them that the Equal Rights Amendment is about abortion or gay rights or the use of bathrooms, for God's sake, football scholarships, and all kinds of things that have nothing to do with the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment is simply saying women and men should be treated equally in the United States government and in the state government. That's what it says, and that's what it means.
This is how old this issue has been out there. When I was in 8th grade, our social studies teacher, who in retrospect, of course, I've realized was himself a bit to the right, railed to his junior high school social studies classes about the Equal Rights Amendment. And he said, he basically went through the list of things you just mentioned. This would mean that men and women have to use the bathroom together, that there would be no separate sports, and just went through all this stuff. And that was, dating myself, this was like the mid-'80s that this was, he was saying it. So here we are, more than 3 decades later, and the same arguments apparently are not just being made, but in some cases are successful.
With some people, I actually come right out and say to them, you're not pro-life, you're just anti-woman. And I'm trying to convince them, I'm trying to do my best. I showed one legislator from DuPage County who's a very conservative guy. I showed him a poll we did in his district where it indicated 72% of his constituents were in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment, and he told me he couldn't vote for it. And I said, do you have any interest in representing these people? And he said, oh, you know, I'm pro-life. I said, no, you're not. You're anti-woman. And then he stopped talking to me.
All right, now that, this is just one example of an issue I want to get in more with you, and that is this. If you can't convince a Republican legislator from a district where 72% of the people favor, in this particular case, the ERA, to vote with 72% that favor it, as opposed to the 28% who are against it, that doesn't speak well of the possibility of virtually any kind of quasi-progressive legislation coming out of Springfield. There's a whole list of things I want to go through with you on. So, just going back to the ERA to finish up, you need 71 to have 3/5, I presume.
That's right.
All right, and so you have 62 Democrats who've signed on. You have 5 Democrats who, for whatever reason, say they can't possibly vote for it, which I just find that a little hard to believe, but let's just put that to the side. Any hope you can round up those 9 Republicans?
The answer is yes. I'm pretty close. We're 2 or 3 votes away, and I have more tricks up my sleeve. I've learned a lot of tricks in 31 years. I've been working to try to pass this about 25 years. Now, some would say, you know, I say that as a matter of pride. Some respond by saying, well, then you must be pretty bad at what you do. You've been working on this 25 years and you can't pass it. But the truth is this becomes filled with politics and filled with things that have no basis in fact. But, you know, elections being what they are, people fall into certain ruts.
Yeah.
And it's hard to move them. But we're getting there, we're close, and we're asking everyone in this room, in fact, should call your state representative in the next several days and ask them, are you voting for the Equal Rights Amendment? My guess is most of the people in this room already have a state representative who's voting for it, but check it out, it's important.
What enticements do you have, or what tricks? I mean, you're not going to share them all with us probably, but how does this work these days? Are there goodies you can deliver? Do you agree to help work on a bill that's important to them? I mean, how do you get people over to your side on this or any other issue?
Well, my cajoling has included the threat that I would give some $10,000 to somebody's opponent. Included reminding someone that I'm on the Rules Committee and they'd like the bills on the floor for a vote, and also begging works sometimes. So this is an important piece of legislation. This is important not only for Illinois, but by the way, we already have equal rights language in our state constitution. But it's important for the United States of America. There are several states waiting to see if Illinois can pass it because they want to be the last state. And I've pledged, once we pass this, to go to any state in the country that needs my help to get this done.
And if Illinois passes, how many states is it need?
We need one more state, a total of 38.
And then it'll in fact be an amendment?
That it will become part of the Constitution. There will be some people who say, well, it's past its deadline. A couple of states tried to rescind, but most constitutional scholars say if you can get Illinois in one more state, it'll be part of the Constitution.
All right, now how many years you been working on this?
25.
25
Are
years.
you going to be part of the list of people who think I'm incompetent?
Well, no. I'm going to put the good spin on it.
Okay.
I'll say you're very persistent and patient. And on the other hand, there's people like me, you've been dealing with me for a while, I get very nervous. Why isn't this passed yet? How come this hasn't passed yet? You know me hyping about the fair tax and the legalization of marijuana. So what do you say to people who don't understand that it could take 25 years to get a sensible piece of legislation passed?
Well, first, I'm honest with people, and I say to them, there are a lot of Neanderthal legislators that simply aren't prepared to do the right thing. Some people living in the dark ages, some people that live a lot of myth and a lot of legend and a lot of guesswork and a lot of politics who just haven't really focused on this. You know, to those that say to me, well, this could lead to gay marriage. I said, where have you been? We passed gay marriage some time ago in the state of Illinois. Why don't you just take a look at the facts as they are? We just have to work through this and many other mostly progressive issues on a regular basis. For all of those people that think Illinois is such a blue state, it's really not a blue state. We have a very blue county, we have a few little blue sections, but the rest of Illinois is a red state. Hard to notice that when some Democratic candidates for statewide office win by 1 million votes. Those votes are coming out of Chicago.
All right, now let's go through some of this list here, and we'll start with one that's close to my heart, the fair tax. And that, for folks out there, that of course is the euphemistic slogan that the proponents have very cleverly put on what is basically old-fashioned progressive taxation.
Which itself is a euphemistic slogan for graduated tax.
Yeah, which itself is just a euphemistic slogan for raising taxes so you can sell the rich.
Which I actually call a tax cut.
That is correct. That's not even euphemism. I mean, some people will get a tax cut. All the Democratic candidates who ran in the primary supported it, said they were going to work hard for it. The nominee, J.B. Pritzker, says he's for it, et cetera, et cetera. And apparently it will not be called for a vote in this session, so that could be on in 2018. Why is that? What are the problems with getting the fair tax through the House?
The fair tax, progressive tax, graduated tax, whatever you call it, it requires a change in the Constitution. So our Constitution, the state of Illinois' Constitution, calls for a flat tax. And to change the Constitution, you have to have a 3/5 majority in the Illinois House and one in the Senate, and put it on the ballot, and then have 60% of the voters approve it. There's a constitutional deadline for putting it on the ballot. That constitutional deadline, I believe, is this week. The House is not in session. It's not going to happen. We wouldn't have the 71 votes anyway. I do believe they have the votes in the Senate to get to the 36 votes in the Senate they need. We don't have the votes in the House. Strangely, the roll call looks very similar to the roll call for the Equal Rights Amendment. Except for this, Republicans have been sold a bill of goods about what the fair tax is. They're running around with their hair on fire because their constituents have been told by the Illinois Policy Institute and other right-wing organizations that this is a huge tax increase for the state of Illinois. But the fact is, this is written in a way that 90+%, in fact, the last one I wrote, 99% of Illinois taxpayers would be getting a tax cut, and only the upper 1%, or even less than 1%, would be paying more. Now, in our federal taxes, we have a graduated tax. We don't pay a flat tax. Virtually every state in America has a graduated income tax. I think there are only 8 states that do not. And even with some of the brackets we've been talking about, which we haven't settled on, we'd be far less than states in the Midwest like Minnesota or even Wisconsin at their upper levels. And so the governor of the state of Illinois and his right-wing minions have done a pretty damn good job in trying to set the tone for this debate by convincing people in Illinois who don't know any better, who aren't really listening, all they hear are sound bites on TV or what they read on the internet. They've been convinced that this is a big tax increase on huge numbers of Illinoisans. It simply ain't true. So what we have to do, those of us that want to pass this, and I'm one of the chief sponsors, is to change the public narrative, to change the public messaging, to convince people that we can raise an extra $2 billion a year to pay for the things we need to pay for in Illinois and still provide 99 or 95 or 92, wherever the bracket line is, % of Illinoisans with a tax cut. The previous time that I proposed this, which was a few years ago, my Facebook went crazy. And when in that particular bill, if you were a family of 4 and you made less than $764,000 a year, you were getting a tax cut. Less than $764,000 a year. I think that's above middle class. 764,000, and so people were calling me all kinds of names on my Facebook, and I would respond. I don't always respond on Facebook, but to a couple of them I said, "Sir, do you make more than $764,000 a year?" "No, I don't." "Well, you're getting a tax cut." "I don't believe you," was the answer, because they believe what they want to believe, and so the narrative has to change if we're ever going to pass this.
Well, isn't it also that people are sick of being taxed? So anytime, it's, let's face it, there's not that much precedent for lowering taxes in this city or this state. So every time people hear about there's new tax legislation, they are bracing themselves. So it seems to me you have to change the narrative on a number of different levels. Right?
We do, and you know, Governor Rauner is calling this the Madigan-Pritzker tax. But tell me, if we have an increase at the upper levels, is there anyone that's going to pay more than J.B. Pritzker? He's been for a graduated income tax this entire time. He will continue to be, regardless of how it impacts him personally. Interestingly, Governor Rauner is the one who stopped this a few years ago. So I had sufficient Democratic votes and a handful of Republican votes 3 or 4 years ago to pass this, to put it on the ballot, and to actually pass tax brackets. And Governor Rauner then went into a Republican caucus, and I know this because somebody in there told me, went into the Republican caucus and said, "If you vote for this, you will have a primary opponent." He threatened them, and you know, those people are very afraid of Governor Rauner. I don't know why, he's never won anything except the governorship. He has spent a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money and wasted a lot of goodwill ripping on Republicans just as much as he does on Democrats. He's a fun guy to deal with.
So we should really call it the Rauner-Pritzker tax, because they're the ones who would actually pay more, both of them, right? They're in the tax bracket.
Well, clearly Governor Rauner is more interested in his pocketbook and the pocketbook of his friends than he is in the welfare of the people of the state of Illinois.
Yeah, but now it also didn't pass in 2014, didn't get on the ballot in 2014, and that was a largely tactical, strategic decision by Speaker Madigan, was it not?
Well, no, we didn't have the votes, so let's just keep it there. We didn't have the votes.
You didn't have the votes to the 71 you needed to get it on the...
That's correct. But again, we did until Bruce Rauner told the handful of Republicans that were willing to do the right thing, "You're off of this."
Well, to pick up on what Mick said, though, people have a suspicion about things that come out of Springfield. There is a mistrust. I don't know. You've been there a long time. I don't believe you're there when the lottery was created. But I hear this from so many people over the age of 50, 55. I thought the lottery was going to pay for education. I thought the lottery was going to pay for our schools. And of course, the lottery just gets subsumed by the rest of the government, the proceeds.
And casinos and video gambling, which I think you were the architects of that legislation as well. So yeah, people feel like we always create these new revenue streams and then it just disappears into the ether again.
Well, between people in public life who don't quite say it the way it ought to be said, and between a general public who wants to believe that any one of these things is going to be the panacea and fix all of our problems, there's a lot of disappointment when these things don't fix all of our problems. As for the lottery, the money does go to schools, but the old shell game is played as well. So instead of adding it to previous year's base and coming out with a larger number, it just goes to schools and it gets, as you say, subsumed. As for casinos, look, gaming and the lottery together is not enough to fix the problems of Illinois. Whether you're for gaming or against gaming is irrelevant at this point. We need more revenue to do the things in the state of Illinois we want to do. But we also need people in government that have a sense of priority, a sense of values. Today we have a governor who on World Autism Day a few years ago cut funding for autistic children to 0. on World Autism Day. And he was so happy, about all of his cuts. And by the way, World Autism Day also happened to be on a Good Friday. It also happened to be the first day of Passover that year. And so he did it at a time that he thought no one would notice. Guess what? We noticed. And 2 weeks later, he had to restore the money because people all over the state of Illinois were beating on him unmercifully about his sense of value. And now today, we have our state universities crumbling before our very eyes because of Bruce Rauner. And we have thousands of Illinois high school kids escaping Illinois to other states to go to college because we aren't taking care of higher education in the state of Illinois. It's killing our economy, not just today, but into the future, because a good portion of those kids never come back to Illinois to create new jobs, to start new businesses, to have new scientific or IT discoveries. We just never see them again.
Where does it end? Because that's a question that I hear a lot from people is like, okay, let's say we get this fair tax / Rauner-Pritzker tax. When we're going to need another revenue stream at some point. Where does it end? The government just keeps gobbling more and more money. And it's not just the right wing that says this. We hear this from a lot of people. I mean, here in Cook County, I have to tell you, there was this big revolt last year against the soda tax. And people, was it really about soda? In some cases, yeah. In most cases, it was just like, why do they need more money? It's just always something else.
If you take a look at the tax structure of our state and other states, you'll find that we actually have a gap. We actually have a structural deficit. What we ought to do one day is have the intestinal fortitude to tear up all our tax laws and rewrite them from the ground up. To do all the things that if a person owned a business, they would do if their business was floundering, to fix it. I'm not saying that means that we did the right thing electing Bruce Rauner, who's a businessman. What I'm saying is that when something's broken, we ought to spend the time to try to fix it. We don't always do that. Sometimes because of politics, sometimes because of time, sometimes because it's too damn hard. And then we go floundering from day to day and from year to year, fixing a little bit here, sticking our finger in the dike to stop a leak over here, but we never quite get at what we need to fix the state of Illinois. I am hopeful, not that this is a panacea either, but I am hopeful that if J.B. Pritzker gets elected governor, he's going to put people around him who share the same values as I do, and as most of the people in this room do, about what's important in the state of Illinois. Healthcare, education, not only K-12, but higher education, transportation system, clean air and clean water. The governor we have today does not lead in any direction that you can fathom. To him, a budget is a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet that need to be cut. Whatever the number is, it's too high. It doesn't make any difference what it's for. Whatever the number is, it should be cut. But that's not what government is supposed to be. What government is supposed to be is a set of values and a set of priorities. And what it's supposed to be is a knowledge by people in government, most importantly the chief executive, that the numbers in a budget represent services to human beings, whether it be school kids, people with mental illness, senior citizens, people that need daycare services, whatever it might be. And when you have people running government who don't share the view that those dollar signs represent services to people, then you have a government that runs amok, and you have a government that can never possibly get at the core problems we face in the state of Illinois.
All right, now Rauner, as much as I agree with you, he's an abomination.
Even I didn't say that.
Yeah. You may have said it once or twice before, but whatever. My words, not yours. As much as I agreed on that point, he's only been the governor since when? 2014? 2015 he was sworn in.
It seems like a long time.
It seems like so long ago. What about and this is the frustrating part to communicate to Democratic voters, progressives, whatever they're called these days, liberals, lefties, those years between 2002 and 2014, when the Democrats, by and large, were running the show, calling the shots?
Well, let me say first that I will tell you right up front that we had two governors back to back that didn't do their job very well. One of them went to jail, and the other one was weak. Good man, heart in the right place, but was weak. He was unable to accomplish what he should have been able to accomplish. The Constitution of the state of Illinois calls on us having two branches of government, three if you count the judiciary, but two branches of government making laws.
No, we don't count them. So.
We count them when we like what they do. We don't count them when we don't like what they do. A legislature all on its own cannot solve the problems of Illinois. A governor all on his or her own cannot solve the problems of Illinois. It requires a partnership. You know, after Governor Rauner was elected and before he was sworn into office, he called many Democratic legislators in to meet with him. It was sort of a get-to-know-you kind of meeting. He didn't get to know me, but he called us in and he said to me in a moment of lucidity, is that a word?
Yeah, it's a good word.
Good, you know what I mean. He said to me, and the only rational question he asked me in the 20 minutes I was with him, what do I need to do to be a good governor? I thought it was a good question, so I answered it for him. I said, don't make the General Assembly your enemy like Rod Blagojevich did. Decide that you have a job to do and do it, and lead us. We're willing to be led. We don't care what political party you're from, and I proved it by telling him that the best governor I have served under in my 30 years is George Ryan. Now, George Ryan also went to jail, I get that. But George Ryan was a good governor. Made a lot of mistakes, did some criminal acts, fine. But he was a good governor. He knew how to move the General Assembly from here to here. He knew how to make things happen. And I said, if you make us your partner in government, no one on my side of the aisle will care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. We will at the next election, but for the next 4 years, we will work with you to make for a better Illinois. And he said, thank you very much, and proceeded the next day to slam the General Assembly and go down the road that he has continued to go down for the last 3.5 years. That is the reason we went over 2 years without a budget, because he was unable to have any relationship at all with members of the House, including Republican members of the House.
Does he call you on your birthday?
He does call me on my birthday, but I'm too smart for him. I don't answer the phone on my birthday.
All right, I have a few other questions about issues before this General Assembly, before we turn over to questions to the audience. And the one, I guess, on a lot of people's mind, you always tell me I get it wrong, so I gotta get it right. I don't want Lou yelling at me again. Gun safety, not gun control. I always go gun control, and you blame me.
I'm guessing with this group, the word gun control would be fine.
Okay. Yeah, anyway, gun safety legislation.
So we refer to it as gun safety legislation for the most part, because as soon as you use the word gun control, the other side leaves the room. You can't talk to people who are constantly talking about the Second Amendment and talk about gun control. It makes them unwilling to have a conversation. So we try to use the term gun safety, at least I do. We were able to pass in the House a bill banning bump stocks, that device that allowed the Las Vegas shooter to get so many rounds off in such a short period of time. That bill went to the Senate, where they've changed it in a way that we don't like. It'll come back to the House. I don't know what's going to happen. We passed a bill on gun dealer licensing. What rational person is against licensing people who sell guns? And yet, with a lot of Republicans against that, the governor vetoed that bill, and we do not yet have enough votes to override the veto. Maybe in the Senate, maybe even not in the Senate, definitely not in the House. So the chief sponsor of that bill, Representative Kathy Willis, has sort of thrown up her hands. She's trying, but the votes aren't there. We have to do better in this area, and I just want to say one more thing about this. when people who are interested in gun safety or gun control legislation speak up, the people on the right are always beating on them. And I just find it interesting that people who are so damn concerned about the Second Amendment don't seem to care at all about the First Amendment.
Yeah.
What will the gun licensing legislation actually do? I mean, not what it requires, but what would it actually do? What effect would it have that isn't already in place? I mean, there's federal licensing already. What does this add to the equation?
Well, first, it would require that every gun sale be done by a licensed dealer. Second, it would help us track weapons, where they came from, how they started in the pipeline, and certainly that would something that many people in law enforcement think is a good idea, to know where the guns came from and how the seller of the gun got to get it in the first place before he sold it to a third party.
Right, but most of the guns used in shootings and crimes have been passed. There's changed hands like 5 or 6 times. So you have a licensing thing that I don't know how that changes it. If someone loans the gun out, if it's stolen, if there's an illicit sale, how does that really get at the problem we're facing? I mean, the real issue, isn't it, that is what you just said, is that, you know, we all have to register automobiles. Anytime that changes hands, there is a requirement that you have to sign the title. It has to be re-registered. That's not, same requirement doesn't exist for guns. So is this a registration thing? Is this a licensing thing? I mean, what is actually, because to me, honestly, like, it seems like a lot of politics. It seems like there's a lot of rhetoric around this, and it doesn't seem like it would actually do anything that needs to be done on the ground.
Well, it does some things need to be done, as I just described. Is that the be-all and end-all? No. Are any of these bills in and of themselves the be-all and end-all? If we banned assault weapons, would that end all problems with weaponry? No. If we passed the bump stock bill, would that end it all? No. But we have to do what we can. And so we have a court system that has decided that the Second Amendment means something else than what it means to us, most people in this audience, or any rational person that reads it. Unfortunately, these gun folks, I had another name, but I'll pass on that. These gun folks are not rational thinkers. And so when you say to them, we want to pass a bill that only allows you to buy 1 gun a month, they're no. When we say to them, we want to ban AK-47s, no. When we remind them that you don't need an AK-47 to go squirrel hunting, they say we don't care. They were designed to kill human beings and only human beings, and that's who gets killed with them. Until we have better people elected to public office, I mean, not say better, I'm not saying they're terrible people, although some of them are. Until we have people that understand that we have to protect people in our society, that we have a responsibility for public safety, and until we get judges elected who are willing to reinterpret the Constitution in the way it was intended, we're going to continue to have these problems. So what we do is bounce from bill to bill and flounder around and try to make a difference, and we do what we can. In some ways, these bills go beyond their actual words to try to let people in Illinois know that we're trying. We're trying to do something. We can't make everything happen that we'd like. Not too long ago, a federal judge in Illinois ordered the Illinois General Assembly to pass a concealed carry bill. We were the only state in America that did not allow for people to walk around with a gun in their pocket. The court ordered us to do it, and so we passed a bill. I voted no, even though we were ordered to do so. I didn't think the judge was going to put me in jail. I didn't think it was and so when we debated that bill, we debated it for hours. Not so much the guts of the bill, but there were any number, dozens and dozens of amendments proposed about where you can't bring it into a church, you can't take it onto a golf course, can you bring it into a park? And we have a very goofy hodgepodge of a bill that ended up being law about where you can and can't carry a gun.
Some of the legislation you sponsored basically suggests to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you, on a lot of the vices, as we used to call them, or people used to call them, the vices, it's like, let's capture that revenue stream, gambling. All right, we'll talk about gambling. So you sort of legalize something that was illegal, and you're sort of like, let's license it, let's capture the revenue. Why is that different with concealed carry? Why, if people are going to carry guns anyway, wouldn't you rather have more people licensed and in the system? That seems to go along with the licensing, the dealer licensing thing, philosophically.
Well, if they're going to carry them, I want them licensed, of course. But that's a different issue from the issue of concealed carry. You know, that's like the Old West. You walk down the street, well, in the Old West, they just carried the gun in their holster, you could see it, right? But I think the notion that people are going to carry guns in a hidden way and be out in society and be at the movie theater with you and be next to you in a traffic jam. No one should ever want to be next to me in a traffic jam. I don't have a gun. These things, it's just a dangerous proposition, and I think most people think that. Even the people that have the guns think that. They'll never tell you that. They sure don't want to have a dust up with someone at the Eden's Expressway where one has bumped the other and they both have guns. That's a recipe for disaster.
I'm personally not arguing for more guns in
society.
I know that. I'm just saying, I mean, people carry guns. They carried guns illegally before this legislation, and obviously the court ordered that the state come up with something, but it just seems to me, if you are in favor of regulation with all these things, whether you like it or not, get people into the system, get them to comply, get more information about the guns that are out there rather than less.
I think that's great, except we can't pass a bill like that. We can't do that because the Second Amendment folks will stop it every time. So virtually every Republican in the Illinois House is pro-gun, and a handful of Democrats are pro-gun. We cannot get to 60 votes to stop a bill, and when we do, we can't get to 60 votes to pass such a bill, and when we do, we have a governor who vetoes it. The next governor will not do that.
Then the issue will be whether you can get enough Democrats to stick together to get a majority, and that'll be tough.
Well, I have reason to believe that we're going to elect some more Democrats this time around, and I have reason to believe that we're going to increase our majority, and I have reason to believe we'll have a better future in the state of Illinois because of it.
Let me ask you one more thing before we open up to questions from the audience. Sports betting. This is seen as the next revenue stream in the world of gambling, and you're behind that as well, right? What's the situation? Where do we stand with that? Support for it? Make the argument to us why we should do this.
First, let me say that this comes from the United States Supreme Court that now has a case out of New Jersey. So some years ago, the United States Congress outlawed sports betting except for Nevada and a few other minor circumstances. And that law has always been under attack. Well, New Jersey just went ahead and passed a sports betting law. And of course, they got sued by the federal government, and that went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. Most people think the court is going to void the federal law and allow Jersey to proceed, which means other states can proceed. But this is not a revenue stream. Though there will be some money from it. You know, we get hundreds of millions of dollars from casinos in the state of Illinois. Sports betting would bring the state maybe $50 million a year, which is not nothing, but it's not going to solve any of our problems either. Today, There are thousands of people in the state of Illinois who gamble illegally on their phones. There are any number of offshore gambling sites.
Wilmette, that hotbed of backroom gambling.
Absolutely. You know, people used to use bookies. Now they don't need bookies. They can go on their phone, and they can go to any number of websites and bet anything they want. And they can not only bet on a game, they can bet on the next batter. It's called instant betting. So I'm not an advocate for that. I'm not an advocate for people blowing their money. What I am an advocate for is getting people to stop doing it illegally. And if they're going to do it, why not tax it? It's no different than when Indiana opened casinos, and the bill I passed to give Chicago a casino got vetoed by Governor Quinn. I didn't do it because I'm a gambler. I didn't do it because I'm fond of gambling. I did it because there's something innately wrong with losing thousands and thousands of jobs to the state of Indiana. Every day people get in their car and they drive to Indiana and they gamble. They also drive to Missouri and gamble. They also drive to Kentucky and Wisconsin and Iowa. And if the only place to buy a Chevy in the Midwest was in Indiana, we would call a special session of the Illinois General Assembly to say, why aren't we selling Chevys in the state of Illinois? But because it's gambling, people have a different point of view. It's an industry, it ought to thrive. We ought to put protections in, as every bill I've ever introduced had, to protect regular, ordinary people. Money for gambling addiction, which we should do whether we have gaming legal or not. So sports betting is just a way to keep money in Illinois that's leaking out of our state.
What about marijuana? When we talked about that a couple years ago, you had just, after a number of years and a lot of work, you had just managed to get the medical marijuana legislation through the General Assembly. And obviously that's going. There's a debate about whether it's going fast enough and that sort of thing. But I remember at that time, Representative Lang, you were very careful about not weighing in on recreational legalization. Your focus at that time was very clearly on the medical program. Where do you stand now? In this last primary season, it was like every mainstream Democratic candidate was like, I'm pro-legalization, including J.B. Pritzker.
So I became a proponent of medical cannabis some years ago because I had read some stories and some anecdotal records about what was going on in other countries and other states. But I never thought I would be the sponsor of the bill. And one day, 4 or 5 people in wheelchairs brought themselves into my office. A couple of them had IV bottles hanging from their arm. They were all with caregivers and, of course, a couple of advocates, paid advocates for medical cannabis. And I'll shorten the story. They begged me to sponsor a bill. And I said, me? I didn't even try it in college. And I don't mean like Bill Clinton. I mean, I really didn't try it in college. And after a long period of time, they convinced me to do it. But
That is to sponsor legislation, not to try it. Right?
Correct. And it took 5 years to pass, 2 years in the regulatory process, and then another year to give the licenses. So 8 years I devoted to that, and now 35,000 people are getting a better quality of life because they're able to get the product for all sorts of medical conditions. But during that period of time, Mick, I became pretty fond of the patients. And so when I answered questions back then about whether I supported or planned to ever support recreational cannabis in Illinois, my answers were I always held back because I just wanted to make sure the program we had was working for patients and make sure that they were protected. I'm not in a different place now. I'm not against cannabis. I think there's a role for it. And recreational cannabis is something we should talk about if we have a carefully planned bill and if there's no risk to the patients that I spent 8 years helping. So here's what we can't have happen. We can't have recreational cannabis to the point where a guy with MS who has been using cannabis legally for years wheels his wheelchair into a dispensary and they say, sorry sir, we're out. We don't have what you need. If that happens, or if that has any risk of happening, I won't be for the bill. So my first goal is to protect those patients and to grow the patient population. And if we can do that and then still safely sell recreational cannabis, it's something we ought to consider. It would create a new industry in Illinois, lots of jobs. It would make for a happier people. The Cheeto industry would improve, you know. And the truth is that in many ways, well, let me put it to you this way. I passed a couple of years ago groundbreaking legislation on heroin and opioid abuse, which has become a model for other states, and even the federal government is looking at it. And subsequent to that, I tried to add to the conditions that you could use medical cannabis for, a provision that said if you're addicted to opioids, you can use medical cannabis because it is an illness, and because in the states that have a robust medical marijuana program, there are 25% less opiate deaths than in the state of Illinois. I wasn't able to do that. But if we can do that in the process of recreational cannabis, I would be more inclined to be for it. So for me, this is still an open question. Patients, number one.
All right, we'll open it up to people in the audience.
Representative Lang, one of the things we've heard since the primaries last month was that the reason that we weren't going to be able to get legislation to put a constitutional amendment for the graduated income tax in gear in time for the deadline was that JB hadn't offered a program. JB hadn't offered a program of his own, so that we couldn't actually see specific numbers that people could digest. But you said a few minutes ago that apparently the General Assembly already has some sort of program involved, it's been around for a while, that we could already use numbers from. I'm a little bit confused about that.
I understand your confusion. To do this requires two things. It requires a constitutional amendment to get us off the flat tax, and then a substantive bill with brackets. So yes, JB was beaten up a little in the press for not having brackets, but why would he have brackets? He's not the governor of the state of Illinois yet. He doesn't have all the apparatus in front of him. We had brackets some years ago, but those brackets are changeable, they're movable. The issue of brackets is a red herring. It really has no important place in the discussion of whether we should have a progressive or a graduated income tax. So for those that say that we can't change the Constitution from a flat tax to allow us to have a graduated tax because they haven't seen brackets, that's simply nonsense. Either you believe we should have a graduated tax and then we can debate what those brackets are, or you don't believe that. And so that was all just political nonsense, in my view.
So I applaud the hard work that you've done for the last 25 years to get the ERA passed, and how long it took you to get medical marijuana passed, and all the other bills that take a very long time. But in the 4 years that we've lived in Illinois, I don't see government working. And I wonder how you would feel about term limits. When the Democrats ran in the primaries, a lot of them were for term limits, and if not for the legislators, for the leaders of the legislature, so that people could actually talk to each other, as you suggest might work.
I appreciate the question. I know it's real popular to be for term limits, but I oppose term limits, and I'll give you several reasons why. First, term limits by their very nature are anti-democratic. People ought to be able to vote for who they want to vote for without any artificial limits on who they get to vote for. That's number one. Number two, when you have forced term limits, the people who are in office are too busy looking for their next job to do the job they're doing. They're more likely to be sell-offs to lobbyists. They're more likely to succumb to special interests. Next, when you have term limits and you force people out of office, the real people who end up running the General Assembly, the real people who would run government, as we've seen in other states that have had term limits, are staff people and lobbyists, because staff people and lobbyists are there until they leave. When legislators have to leave, they're leaving in an artificial way. And finally, and maybe most importantly, after a period of time, legislators develop an area of expertise, or several areas of expertise. For instance, the majority leader in the Illinois House of Representatives, Barbara Flynn Curry, who has been there even longer than I, is our resident expert on taxation. Nobody knows more than Barbara Flynn Curry about taxation, and no one ever will. And if she was forced out of office by an arbitrary term limit, first, there would be no one to replace her knowledge on that issue, and certainly the person that replaced her from her district would not know anything about anything compared to her. I think it's a fairly artificial notion that says that the only way to replace government, to make government better, is to force people out. The better way to improve government is for a citizenry to take more responsibility for electing better people. And when you elect better people, you won't care how long they are there. I hope I'm there because my constituents think I do a good job. And I hope if term limits were proposed to them, they would vote no on the theory that, well, wait, we kind of like Lang being there. Now, to those that don't, I'm sure they would vote for term limits. I'm not universally liked, you might get. So I'm a very strong opponent of term limits, but I understand why they are popular. People are frustrated. They see that government isn't working always the way it should. You read things in the newspaper, you're not sure if you should believe it or not, like the feud between Mike Madigan and Bruce Rauner. The war between Mike Madigan and Bruce Rauner has not kept the state of Illinois from having a budget. The thing that has kept the state of Illinois from having a budget is Bruce Rauner. We go to meetings, he doesn't show up. We go to more meetings, he doesn't show up. We propose budgets, he doesn't even follow the constitutional provision that requires him to propose a budget. And so all of these things are important in why the general public thinks, just get rid of all these mopes and let's bring in a new group of mopes. But if all you do is replace one group of mopes with another group of mopes, you won't have any better government than you have today.
What do you think about Representative Jerry Costello joining the Republicans against the progressive income tax? Now the Illinois Policy Institute is saying, you see, it's now a broad support that we don't want it, basically, with the Policy Institute saying because of Jerry Costello.
For those that don't know, Jerry Costello is a state rep from deep southern Illinois, like coal mine country, deep southern Illinois. He's very conservative. He's one of these Second Amendment guys. He's an anti-tax guy. He's not pro-choice. So he's a very conservative guy, and in his district, he's got a very strong level of people who believe the progressive or graduated income tax is the wrong way to go. And so he did sign on to a Republican resolution saying that he was not going to be for the graduated tax. It's his privilege. We're going to work toward passing a graduated income tax in the next session of the General Assembly. Mr. Costello will still be with us. He's a good man and a good legislator. I don't agree with him on everything. But we'll let nature take its course, and we're going to continue to work on this.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm your constituent. Hard to say.
I'd have worn a better tie had I known the constituent was going to be there.
I was actually in Springfield last week. Tried to meet with you, but you were in the chair, and which what you have to do. It was Environmental Lobby Day, and I'm just looking to find out what you're thinking about the Dynegy coal bailout in Illinois, and what your thoughts are, and if we can get you to vote no on the bailout.
Well, it's an excellent question. First, let me say that I'm proud that every year I've run, I've been endorsed by the Sierra Club. I think that's important to note. What's been referred to as a bailout, I think, is premature. That isn't soup yet. We don't know what a final bill is going to look like relative to those issues. I don't think the Illinois General Assembly ought to bail out the coal industry. I'm not a fan of coal. I am a fan of industry, however. I think if we're going to let coal mines close, and we should in many cases, then I think it's appropriate to make sure that we find some work for those thousands of coal miners that work downstate. I'm not a fan of bailing out anybody, but I am a fan of negotiating solutions to problems. And until I see a final bill, not just a proposed bill, not just a draft, not just what people think might come out of it, I'm not prepared to tell you how I would vote on a bill I haven't seen yet. What I've seen so far, I don't like.
I'll just add one more thing. They've said that they will not protect the jobs in Illinois if they get the bailout.
I think that will be important down the road when we see a final bill. I'm a big supporter of labor unions, so that would make me a big supporter also of the United Mine Workers. If those mines close, we have to figure out what we're going to do with thousands of people and their families. Doesn't mean we should pollute the air in the meantime. It just means that it's just one more thing we have to work on as they negotiate that bill.
Any other questions? Right there.
Hi, I could ask a lot of questions, but I'm going to pick one. I too was in Springfield last week, and I think you were in the chair in the House on Monday, a little more than a week ago. And so this is a question about criminal justice reform and doing things in our criminal justice system differently, which is actually an issue that Republicans and Democrats nationally and here in Illinois tend to agree on. So I think you were in the chair on Monday when there was this kind of 25 minutes of debate, sorry everyone, I'm going to take you into the weeds, about a specific bill that would give a facilitated process for people in jail pre-trial to vote in Illinois. And it was a very political debate, so could you kind of tell the audience a little bit about that back and forth and what it means for the near future of criminal justice reform in Illinois?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, and this was an unbelievable debate. I think you'll agree. When people go to jail and they've been convicted of a felony, they aren't voting. But what about people who are arrested, who are being detained, haven't been convicted of anything? They're just detained. Republicans in the House actually believe these folks should not be able to vote. Now, that's what the debate was about. These people, maybe some of them are guilty, maybe all of them are guilty, but they haven't been found guilty. They're still American citizens. And every one of them, if they had bail money, would have been able to vote. So this is not only appalling from the point of view of these are American citizens who are not being allowed to vote, but it's also wrong from the point of view that it discriminates against people of color. It discriminates against poor people. Because if the guy who needed $5,000 for bail had it, he'd be home, and on election day he'd get to vote. And if you listen to that debate, it would help you figure out what political party you want to belong to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah. And
it would also, I just have to say this, what blew me away about it is you had women of color representatives that were speaking from their heart and their experience. So it reminded me that we have to elect people that are closest to that, to a lot of progressive issues.
I think it's, you've hit the nail on the head. So we talk about term limits and how to really improve government. How you really improve government, citizens taking government into their hands. Really know the candidates that you're voting for. Look, there are places in the state where Democratic areas vote Democrats in who are no better than the Republican. Not every Democrat is great. Not every Republican is terrible, although most are. Not as human beings, don't get nervous. They're politics, not so good. And you asked the question, what does this mean for the future of criminal justice reform? And I think what you're asking me is, does a debate like that hurt our ability moving forward to make changes where we can agree on things? And I think the answer to that is no. I think it's not. I think where Democrats and Republicans can agree, I think we will continue to agree. Interestingly, we do not have a lot of legislators that look at the big picture of anything. Most legislators go from bill to bill to bill and don't knit 3 or 4 criminal justice reform bills that we might vote on in a week, but not back to back to back. And you'll see members who have inconsistent votes. And you would say, well, how did he vote yes on that and no on that? It's because they look at each bill as a separate bill. Because a different lobbyist may have talked to them. Because a constituent may have called them. We need to take a deeper dive when we elect people so that we get better people so that they can make decisions for the public good and have some relationship to public policy. Unfortunately, in our state, it may be true in other states, but my expertise is in Illinois, you would think that it's public policy first and politics flows from that. So you would think that people would say, well, if I'm the best state representative or the best state senator or the best mayor or the best dog catcher I can be, I'll get elected. I won't have to worry about it and I can just do the right thing. But in many cases in Illinois, lots of people in the Illinois General Assembly, their politics comes first. They decide what the political thing to do is, and then they find some rationalization to defend it. That's wrong. And until we elect better people, it's going to continue to be wrong.
You said that it was very important for the people to be involved in their government. And I totally agree with that. I think that's why all of us are here tonight. There is one basic problem that needs to be addressed, though, and that is the issue of gerrymandered districts. What are you doing about that?
I'm a proponent of map reform. But the only reform that's out there today is something called the Fair Map. Who's heard of it? But the Fair Map is not fair. So I get emails from people who have never read the Fair Map Amendment, who say, I ought to be for the Fair Map Amendment, but they haven't read it themselves. Here's the deal. For those who are interested in making sure that the state of Illinois follows the Federal Voting Rights Act, and for those who are interested in making sure we increase minority participation, the Fair Map Amendment won't work. The Fair Map Amendment basically says, let's have a computer, doesn't say the word computer, but it basically says, let's have a computer draw nice little maps, nice square little maps. And I would admit that if you look at the map of some legislative districts, you would say, well, how does this all work together, these odd shapes? But every map we have passed since I have been there has been approved by the Federal District Court. And every map that has been approved since I have been there has increased minority participation, minority representatives, minority senators, whether they be Latino or African American or now even Asian, we have increased that. If the Fair Map Amendment happened, we would lose minority participation in the Illinois House of Representatives for sure. And I think that would not be good for government. I think that would not be good for the rights of minorities, for poor people, for anybody else. On the other hand, I do support finding some way to reform how we draw maps. For instance, the most egregious problem with the maps today in our law is this. You know, a map is just a bill like any other bill, like when we named popcorn the state snack food some years ago. It's a bill. Passes the House, passes the Senate, gets signed by the governor. So you can imagine that when you have a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate and a Democratic governor, somehow you're going to be able to draw a map and get it signed by the governor. Or the reverse, for Republicans in all those offices. But what happens when you have a difference? What happens when you have a Democratic legislature and a Republican governor? Or what happens when you have a Democratic House and a Republican Senate and you can't get a map to the governor or get it signed? The crazy law in Illinois says that you create a commission. This commission is of equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans. 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. They aren't going to have any better time drawing the map than anybody else did. So what happens then? The law, you would ask what the law says then. A name is drawn from a hat. In the hat go 2 names, a Democratic name and a Republican name. Somebody is chosen to pick a name out of it. Sometimes it's a hat. I witnessed it once. They did it in Lincoln's punch bowl. It was great. There was no punch left in the punch bowl. And they pick out a name. And that's the 9th member of the commission. It will not surprise you that the time a Democrat was picked, we ended up with a Democratic map. And when a Republican was picked, we ended up with a Republican map, which they didn't do so well because we won 4 of the 5 elections during that 10-year cycle. So, this ought to be changed. This is a nonsense way to resolve disputes. I'm all for changing that. And I'm all for looking at ways to improve map drawing. But please don't fall prey to the argument that's out there that says that if somebody's not for this one particular proposal that's out there, that somehow they're against map reform. So I'm against that proposal, but I'm for map reform.
All right, I think we're out of time here. Thanks, Lou.
Yeah.
Appreciate you coming by.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I appreciate the great audience, the great questions, especially from you guys. Ben will advertise when I'm on his show next.
Yes, we'll be on, is it coming May? Oh, I don't want to get the date wrong, Lou.
I think we're in June.
June?
Yeah.
No, because we're waiting for session then. Right?
Yeah. So I'll give
What's
her
the date?
I don't know. I'll look it up while you're talking.
Sometime in June. I can
All
barely
right.
remember what I have tomorrow, Lou.
And we will be back here next month.
Yeah.
June 6th.
Oh, the same day that we're back here, right?
All right.
We're back.
I think
June
it is.
6th at 4 o'clock. I'll be
Yes.
on Ben's radio.
We go at it.
All right. Well, thank you for coming by. Thanks to all you guys for taking part of your evening out. We really appreciate you showing up, all your engaged questions every month. It's really great to see you and have this conversation. So, see you in June. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.